Yeah, I've been quite ambitious with this one. It's now the Postage Stamp Lectures. It was the Postage Stamp Lecture. It's now 3. Because, to be fair, I'm trying to get Edgar Wood up into the stratosphere where he belongs, seriously. David Morris was well and truly on the right track with Edgar Wood. I've been on board since 2011 with the research as well, and Richard, of course, has been there from a couple of years later. And it just gets better and better, what we find out. So without further ado, let's get into it. You might notice it's not just Edgar Wood. He's joined up there by his artistic stablemates. They are stablemate designers. So I've got a series prologue, 2-part pledge to the northwest. Pledge number 1 is in memory of John H.G. Archer. John was good to me, he gave me a bit of time. I had a whole afternoon at his house and learned an awful lot from him about Edgar Wood, and was incredibly thankful to him and his family for that. To him, in particular, a pledge to eternally banish the following Edgar Wood from history. A figure completely omitted from the following canon-shaping texts on the roots of architectural and design-related modernism. The ones I've picked out particularly in yellow are the ones that were published in this country. All of them exclude Edgar Wood. In the case of the Germans, it's suspicious. We should be suspicious about it in light of the writings of Hermann Matthesius. When it comes to McGrath and it comes to Philip Morton Shand, it's baffling. In particular, Morton Shand, there's a list where he lists the moderns off in the same order that I would, and indeed as I present them. And Wood is just simply not there. He's gone. That could be London centricity. It could be Pevsner already planting seeds of doubt about Wood's importance, because Pevsner does, and that's a big part of my research, is trying to figure out why Pevsner is hiding Edgar Wood. This all sounds very conspiratorial, but I genuinely think it's there. So, Edgar the Rond, a minor member of the arts and crafts movement who created interesting, if not startlingly original furniture, along with Charles Spooner, Wickham Jarvis and Walter Cave. Remember those names, they will appear later on. That was Peter Floud of the V&A in 1955. This one is very much my opinion. It won't be popular, but I'm going to pursue it. A victim of subtle belittlement in the writings of Nikolaus Pevsner, example in the Buildings of England series. And we'll use this building as an example. The fitments of Long Street were designed by him too. For Edgar Wood was an arts and crafts all-rounder, and they are much more daring than the building. The houses he designed at Middleton in 1895, etc., are of the Voysey kind, broadly speaking. He's fitting him in very much below Voysey. He's a follower, just like many other arts and crafts architects. He wasn't. He was a man that very much took up the gauntlet of what Voysey set down, and like Baillie Scott, like George Walton, like Charles Rennie Mackintosh, he found his own idiom, and he was one of the leading arts and crafts architects in this country, and indeed across Europe and the world. Excuse me. Example number 2. One of the pairing of Lancashire architects of no great renown, with Wood seemingly equivalent in such lowly stature to his architectural partner J. Henry Sellers. Now, I've got a note at the bottom there. I believe there's a bit of a Sellers myth, and I think that Pevsner starts in 1942, and it gets taken up by a few people. You start to see it appearing in the Buildings of England under other authors as well as Pevsner. And I've got a good example there from Dennis Sharp, who says, the name of J. Henry Sellers must be linked with Wood's because it is yet to be made clear which of these gentlemen they worked in partnership was the stronger personality. No one ever said some of the things that did get said positively about Edgar Wood about J. Henry Sellers, and you're going to see some pretty positive things said about Edgar Wood. Okay, an artistic figure of little to no direct influence, with Jill Seddon saying, despite his at one time international reputation, it is impossible to name an architect or designer directly influenced by Edgar Wood's work. Don't worry, it won't all be like this, by the way. I just want to get what's been written about him down early doors. You get plenty of imagery later on. A lesser man, as per the following book review. The illustration and editorial commentary are particularly informative and interesting about lesser men, such as Edgar Wood and Oliver Hill, perhaps more so than they deserve, as well as the big names, Burgess, Godwin, Voysey, et al. LB in the Burlington magazine, 1985. A progressive, if somewhat restricted talent, whose first Church of Christ scientist, with its overtones of Edwardian neo-baroque and of Baillie Scott's neo-vernacular, was about as innovative as provincial English architecture of the period could be. That includes my favourite word, provincial. I absolutely detest it. Manchester is not provincial, Middleton is not provincial, nothing of the sort. I think the only thing that made it slightly better, one of the authors in the 70s, they described Baillie Scott, Mackintosh as well as the Grand Provincials. Can just about accept that. Anyway, that was Dennis DeWitt, who was an American academic. So, series prologue, the second part, and this is in memory of my friend and mentor David Morris, a very, very good man, dear friend. I was hugely disappointed not to see him before he died. We were over, he got COVID, and I had a chance and he met my second daughter. The last time I saw him in person was at the christening of my firstborn daughter. He's a great man, he did so much for this project, I couldn't say enough about him. Oh, excuse me. Wrong way. And this is a pledge to him, because he was absolutely leading the way on this, and I was with him, and we were going places with it. Richard was with him as well, we were going places with it, and indeed the guys at Lindley, because you provided a lot of really good information from coming across from over there. It's a pledge to deliver the following canonical Edgar Wood to history. Right, Edgar Wood, the modern, he was among the first Edwardian arts and crafts architects to warrant a full individual profile article in the British Architectural Press. Now this is important. It is illustrated with Wood's fully conceived domestic, commercial and ecclesiastical buildings and their interiors, including furniture, doors, door furniture, stained glass and wall and ceiling treatments. To quote the article, such instances of artistic endeavour cannot be too widely made known, and in view of the low average performance of architects in England, we may be pardoned if we make the most of an Edgar Wood. Yes, we must be pardoned. Thomas Raffles Davison, leading architectural illustrator and the founding editor of the British Architect. He knew what he was talking about. This is a man that when memorial volumes were put out for him much later on, everyone was on board with it. The likes of Lutyens, the whole of the architectural field in Britain. Very respected man. He knew what he was talking about. Edgar Wood was a really good designer. Okay, the fourth most analysed modern. Now we're going to find out gradually what a modern is. In the seminal real-time history of the arts and crafts movement, Das Englische Haus. Ahead of George Walton and behind only CFA Voysey, Charles Rennie Mackintosh and Mackay Hugh Baillie Scott. These are Wood's preeminent stablemates. Okay, and also from Odasis, an outstanding representative and leader in the present-day British house architecture and construction, along with Letherby, Scott, Mackintosh and Townsend. And that is a review of Walter Shaw Sparrow's book, The British Home of Today. Bizarrely, none of Shaw Sparrow's books feature Edgar Wood. There are some peculiar anomalies in the history of Edgar Wood and the arts and crafts movement, that's one of them. Oh. A famous architect of a famous artistic house, i.e. Banny Royd over at Huddersfield. And this appears in the review of Das Englische Haus, in the studio, the Bible of the Arts and Crafts Movement from 1904, alongside the famous houses of Richard Norman Shaw, Philip Webb, Voysey, Baillie Scott. The review only mentions those men. That's the calibre that he actually holds. And incidentally, all of those images, they were published between 1900 and 1905 in journals both in this country and abroad. The beautiful colour lithographs, they come from Germany, where there is becoming more and more of a craze for modern design. They've taken up the things that they've seen in the studio, and then they start producing massive volumes of colour lithographs. That is a Gesamtkunstwerk work, right there, a total work of art. A thoroughly original soul whose works are definitely his own efforts and testify to a creative power of the highest order. The resulting excellence of his works ranks without question alongside contemporary masterpieces in terms of style and design. Michael Bunny, later Michael Bunny MBE, he himself was an architect, he worked extensively on Hampstead Garden suburb under Lutyens. Again, he knew what he was talking about. And there is the kind of brilliant profile in modern about form on Edgar Wood, the best profile that exists on him. Incidentally, Wood possibly suffered from not providing photographs of his work early. He should have done it earlier. I think the Germans wanted to know that he was really producing the work he was, and that only started happening from about 1904, 1905 onwards, but it really comes to a crescendo about here. The following year, he's described as one of the world's most famous architects. Die Zeit, national German newspaper out of Hamburg, reporting on the exhibition of the 8th International Congress of Architects in Secessionist era Vienna. Here, Edgar Wood appeared, presumably in person, as it is described as a personal invite, as one of 12 outstanding architects and artists. This was at the behest of leading secessionists Otto Wagner and Josef Hoffmann, seen there on the left and right in postage stamps. Now I'm going to point out at this point, because my dad got a bit confused when we went through this, those were not issued as part of the Congress of Architects in 1908. They are mid-century stamps, because all the postage stamps you're going to see are mid-century, mid-20th century postage stamps that are to do with the onset of people's fame. And my argument is that the architects, Wood and his cohort, they should all be postage stamp famous, and Britain needs to get a grip on them. With only an exception or two, the other invitee exhibitors alongside Edgar Wood at Vienna were strongly tied to the Vienna Secession, the Vienna Werkstätte, and or the Deutsche Werkbund. They were all really famous, they still are. And of the 11 other invitees, many have subsequently achieved postage stamp levels of fame. For example, Wilhelm Kreis, that there is the, I think it's the German Museum of Hygiene that he created, former East Germany stamp there. Bruno Schmitz, Josef Mehofer, and now we get into the really big secessionist names like Josef Maria Olbrich, Coleman Moser, Richard Lusch. The stamp there, of course, that's Otto Wagner's Postal Savings Bank, but Lusch was a secessionist sculptor and he contributed to many things, including the sculpture of Franz Josef that you'll find in the lobby area of that. It's a Gesamtkunstwerk. This is a Gesamtkunstwerker contributing to a total work of art. Then you've got Arnus Lindgren and Eliel Saarinen, both beloved to me. They are Finnish. And Arnus Lindgren, incidentally, I discovered the other day that he introduced the terrace house to Finland. We've just completed a deeply stressful house move into a Finnish terrace house. Who do you think, in the years preceding that, he could have had a chat with about terrace housing? Edgar Wood at the International Congress of Architects in 1908. Absolutely. Okay, and then a couple of men that didn't make it onto postage stamps. Karl Wallach, he was a sculptor, and this is a sculpture depicting Mozart in a square in Vienna. So he's not done too bad. Didn't go on a postage stamp, but still pretty high caliber, I would say. Max Lauger, excuse my German pronunciation, I only do Finnish and English. He was an applied artist, but also, it seems, an architect, and created this incredible building here that I didn't know anything about before I started doing this work. It's almost kind of sister building to Hoffmann's Palais Stockler. It existed in the Netherlands. Sadly, it's demolished in the late 1970s, called Het Carriol, and it looked incredible. And then I've kind of pondered if this is nepotism, that Paul Hoffmann's there. Is he a relation of Josef? I don't think he is, actually. The Viennese were very much dwellers in apartments and apartment blocks, famously in Vienna, and I think they were quite interested in getting a British architect who was dedicated to that form of building in there, to this exhibition. But it's a pretty outstanding set of fellow invitee exhibitors. And so Edgar the Pioneer Modernist. So he's not been included over here, but he was included over here, and he was included in various other places, some of which I'm not going to use today. I'm going to use that in future lectures. A figure of immense influence abroad, studied and revered chiefly in countries like Holland and Sweden, along with Norman Shaw, Voysey and Mackintosh. That's Howard Robertson, again, another really respected architect. A man of real influence in the direction of Germany, alongside Walton, Ashbee, Mackintosh, following the initial influence of Letherby and McMurdo. Letherby, by the way, Letherby's influence, it's not about architecture, it's about theory. He barely gets any, he built 6 buildings. I mean, we know about Melsetter, we see it in all the beautiful books on the arts and crafts movement. No one knew about Melsetter, it wasn't published anywhere. So don't mistake that with Letherby. And we're going to look at Letherby and how he's a slightly different part of the movement. And there we go, a pioneer of the modern movement. Direct quote, 2 years before the publication of Pioneers of the Modern Movement, alongside CFA Voysey, Mackintosh and Walton. And that comes from Charles Cornell and Marjorie, along with Marjorie Cornell. Cornell was also a modern, as identified by Helen Matthesius. And yeah, those are the books where, you know, Wood's over here, Voysey not over there. A pioneer of progressivism at the outbreak of the 20th century, alongside Scott, Mackintosh, Hoffmann, Sitter, Wagner, Sullivan, Frank Lloyd Wright and Henry van der Velde, as well as the author himself, Eliel Saarinen, and that's from Saarinen's Search for Form in Art and Architecture. Saarinen is certainly famous. They actually rung the bell in this tower, I think, for the first time in 150 years, to mark to mark his centenary of his death would have been. Would that be right? Yeah. There was a centenary, or whatever it would have been, very recently. And yeah, they stopped everything. They ran the church. They ran the bell tower of the Central Railway Station, the famous Central Railway Station. And I went and picked up my dedicated magazine on Eliel Saarinen from my local Prism supermarket. So yeah, very famous. Okay, and that extract in the Saarinen book actually comes from the second chapter, entitled Retrospective Analysis. 51 artists' names in there. Read those and weep. And who's the man missing over here? Without a postage stamp? Our very own Edgar Wood. Minor figure, local architect. It's not true. Can this really be correct? Does Edgar Wood of Middleton really belong to the upper echelons of the history of art? Well, I firmly believe that he does. In fact, I believe Edgar Wood was a canonical pioneer of modern design as early as 1900. And this is because I have been putting to the test a key left to us by David Morris. The key was David's comment here in Long Street, I think through on the main stage of the church, where he talked about this English house, and he said, it sounds to me like an artistic clique that Matthesius is describing in the section that Wood appears in. And that clique is known as the Moderns. They were the inspirers of Darmstadt, they were pioneers of the modern movement. That is my take. Take a moment. That's the Glasgow School of Art, which desperately does need rebuilding because it's one of the finest works of art to be produced in the British Isles in the last couple of centuries. That is 14 South Parade by Voysey. This is Dunarden by Edgar Wood, demolished about 1980, sadly. The reason it looks like pretty much half the buildings built as semi-detached houses in the 1930s is because it almost certainly directly inspired them. And down here is Darmstadt, which we're going to learn about now. Quickly going to touch on the moderns though. I'm going to use the term preeminent moderns, the best of the best. That is these 5 guys here, and C.R. Ashbee's a kind of 6th man, because he nearly gets there in terms of what I think the Germans are really revering these gentlemen for. And then over here we've got some eminent moderns, so just merely the best. The likes of Charles Harrison Townsend, Henry Wilson, Margaret MacDonald. In terms of the 2 architects up there, Townsend and Wilson, we'll touch upon why they are not preeminent. Down here you've got Margaret MacDonald. She's kind of representative of a whole raft really of applied artists who are supporting this side of the movement. And of course it is International Women's Day today. The moderns and the new art side of the movement, they definitely did support women being heavily involved in the arts and crafts movement. I would suggest maybe more on the other side of the movement, which includes the Cotswold School. I'd love to touch on that kind of thing, but we need to move on with these guys because we need to talk about these guys. The Darmstadt Artist Colony on the Matildenhohe Hesse in Germany was established in 1897 by the Grand Duke of Hesse, the Anglophile grandson of Queen Victoria. They're all Anglophiles at this point in time. We'll skip through this. You probably know about it, go and read about it, but effectively they were creating an artist colony that was also operated as a kind of an exhibitionary ground. And today, despite some World War II bomb damage, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And it offers, in UNESCO's own words, a testimony to early modern architecture, urban planning and landscape design, all of which were influenced by the arts and crafts movement and the Vienna Secession. I'm going to tell you exactly what part and exactly who from the arts and crafts movement has inspired it. Because what you'll find if you go and read this, I'll start talking about Morris and Webb and Red House. That stuff was 40 years old at that point. It was old hat. The Germans were interested in what was going on the ground in that moment in Britain, 1900. So there we go. At the top you've got Mackintosh's iconic Glasgow School of Art. Below that you've got Josef Maria Olbrich's Haus Ernst Ludwig, which was a series of artists' studios. Very similar lines it's been designed along. Now we know Olbrich knew and revered Mackintosh, and generally speaking this is one of those instances where it is generally accepted that the Glasgow School of Art has inspired the Ernst Ludwig house. It's a sign that Olbrich is a really, really good architect, that it's not a doppelganger. Because believe me, when it comes to the moderns, I've looked and I've found a lot of doppelgangers, which is great because it means that people are really influential. People are going to straight up copy you, you are really good at what you're doing. But people like Olbrich do a great job of taking influence, of taking motifs, bending and twisting them around and hiding them. So I've been kind of pulling it apart, and they are all there. The moderns are all there at Darmstadt. This is one of the first things he designs in 1900 after the Ernst Ludwig house. And again, he's using Mackintosh as inspiration. Up here is Mackintosh's 1900 design for an artist's cottage. I have a creeping suspicion this might have been asked for by the Germans, a lot like the House for an Art World competition was set up. The Germans were really interested in these designers, and I think they might very well have been offering them financial incentives to take design work off them. You think that sounds far-fetched? I've got a good quote from Henry Wilson later on that might make you think twice about it, and this is one of those instances. Because this was published in 1902 in Decorative Kunst. It was only exhibited in Glasgow in 1900. It doesn't appear anywhere else in print. So this is stuff finding its way out the back door in Glasgow and somehow ending up in Darmstadt. It's benign industrial espionage, really. Like seriously. I mean, I think I've heard that this is described as a benign industrial spy, and I think that there might have been quite a lot of that going on. The GSA, Glasgow School of Art, we know that, for example, Mathesis knows that this is by Charles Rennie Mackintosh. It doesn't get published anywhere until 1924 because of the nature of commission. It was a little bit dodgy that it ended up in Mackintosh's hands. That he was able to do a commission as grand and important as the School of Art. That's probably why it never got published anywhere. But Mathesius knows it exists in correspondence where Mackintosh explains, I'm really sorry, Mathesius, you can't publish it anywhere because it can't have my name on it. And if you see, look carefully, you've got the canted bay windows popping up through the central bit, you've got that over here, you've got the green roof line borrowed from Mackintosh, and if you see this motif here, very similar to what you've got going on over there, and very similar to what you've got going over here. But he's hiding it very nicely, I think. This, for me, is a dead giveaway. I mean, these buildings are really modern, really weird buildings. There's no kind of forerunners to buildings like this. So if they're going to be that similar, then you have to be suspicious. And especially when we know that Olbrich himself knows Mackintosh and reveres Mackintosh. And I think the thing I really love is this side window of the studio house, side entrance, and then down on Olbrich you've got the side windows, the side entrance, and the window detailing, you've got your Margaret MacDonald statues, spooks, and then you've got Olbrich doing a very, very similar thing down here. It's too close for me, has to be influenced by. And I've got a quote from Olbrich. I sent him home like a donkey, oh, this foolish critic, this dumb lamb, allowed himself in my presence to make fun of Mackintosh's work. Voysey's 14 South Parade, 1891, and its influence upon House Olbrich. Incidentally, there are earlier designs for Olbrich's work. I thought about putting them in and then took them out because it's just too much. a way that you can see how when you take those initial kind of drawings and then add in the work by the moderns, you can see how he ends up with the forms that he has over here. It's things like the expanse of white on the side of the building there, and then the positioning of these windows. They were increasingly following the plan, people like Voysey. They were kind of building from plan upwards, and it's all very proto-modern and leads to really unconventional buildings. I mean, how unconventional would that be appearing in Victorian Britain? And you see it being echoed over here by Olbrich. Also in the details, you see Olbrich bringing details like the checkerboard fireplace tiles outside and putting them on the outside of the building. He does the same thing with the classic Voysey floor-to-ceiling staircase, puts it on the outside of the building there on House Olbrich. You see this motif as well. I think it's difficult to know where the motifs start off sometimes, but you see Walton doing it, you see Mackintosh doing it as well, because they're an artistic clique. Come on. Okay. And then Baillie Scott's House for an Art Lover. That competition was set up in Darmstadt, where they effectively just wooed both Mackintosh and Baillie Scott to joining into the artistic competition, because they wanted to get at their design work. And you see Olbrich lifting this section, but then adding some zest in, some Art Nouveau zest. I'm going to touch upon where the Art Nouveau zest is coming from. I'm pretty sure that's Baillie Scott's White House up in Helensburgh. And this is one of the Olbrich interiors. A lot of the interiors at Darmstadt were very similar to this, and they're generally kind of following this kind of English example that you see in both Baillie Scott's and Voysey's houses in the kind of two-storey central hall. And there you've got a Baillie Scott fireplace from the studio a couple of years earlier being aped by Olbrich and House Christensen. George Walton's The Lays. And this is where it gets really suspicious, because the Lays isn't making it into print, and it's pretty much being built as Darmstadt's been built. So how on earth does this motif here end up so strongly mirrored over here on the house Keller? And then you've got the giveaway Voysey buttresses, you've got the white render, you've got the kind of porthole circular window, which is a giveaway on Voysey's architecture. And then getting back to Walton, you've got this fascinating kind of mansard roof line and a kind of extra emphasis on the classicist kind of element, because Walton was a classicist. He was kind of neo-Regency modern. That was his kind of unique take on the new arts, this kind of design idiom that was being promoted by the moderns. Edgar Wood's Donarden, 1897-98, an influence on Olbrich's House Christensen. The reason I believe in this so much is because me and David picked this out about 2011, 2012, right when I first came on the project. We were really suspicious. When we started finding quotes that were suggesting he was big in Europe, you start going to look. And this was one of the absolute dead giveaways. Wood gets published in Germany for the first time, so does Mackintosh. They're all getting published about the first time in Germany in 1898. And the Germans, incidentally, are asking for fresh material off them. You get stuff in the German journals that you don't get in the British journals, which just goes to show you how keen. It's not casual, it's interesting what they're doing. They really want to get fresh design work from the Brits. And there it is. I love the fact that you can colorise Edwardian images now, because it looks glorious now. This is Donarden, and it's a tragedy that it was lost, and a really great quote from Sir John Betjeman to drive the point home. The greatest contribution this country has made to European architecture is the detached and semi-detached late Victorian house for artistic people of moderate incomes. And there's a pristine example. I believe Edgar Wood's Lindley Gatehouse, because this was published in Germany in Decorative Kunst, just like that was published in Decorative Kunst, I believe that the Gatehouse might very well have had an influence upon Olbrich with the House Dieters, which acts as a kind of lodge. It's on the corner of the artist's colony. And whereas, they're not going to create a gatehouse because it's far too spacious for all of that area, I think it's all about this spacing of things. And I'm fascinated by the fact that the turret's up there and the turret's up there, the doors down here and the canted bay windows down there. I think he's taking these forms and tinkering with them, because of course you've got an element of butterfly planning going on with this. And this is the kind of building that you see and then you start thinking a little bit of the first Church of Christ Scientists a few years later. So maybe there were ideas going back and forth a little bit. We think Wood may very well have been quite active in terms of communicating with members of the European avant-garde. We just need to find evidence for it. And here we go, here at Longstreet Methodist Church, 1899. Although it dates back, David found out, and I think proved, without reasonable doubt, that this church and schools complex actually dates back to about 1894, the planning for it. But then it's around about this point that it starts nouveauing it, so to speak. And I've scanned about a lot of churches from this period, and this motif where it runs up through the centre, you don't see it very much at all. Sedding, who is regarded or is noted by Matthesius to have been the father figure of this set of architects, the moderns, he did it a couple of times, but it's only really this building that you see it anywhere around about the time that Behrens comes up with this motif. So I believe that Longstreet Methodist Church and Schools directly inspired one of the buildings at Darmstadt. Then we've got the influence of the moderns' colour usage, which is something, again, I think in particular when he talks about Voysey, he talks about the being colourful architects. You've got Ashbee there, George Walton there, House Olbrich there, all in yellow. And then fascinating kind of play-off between the reds and the greens here with Voysey, and again on House Keller by Olbrich. Now, to find some other buildings by moderns that seem to be getting echoed at Darmstadt, we've got Smith and Brewer's Mary Ward settlement, which incidentally does get picked up on by Pevsner. Pevsner's really interesting because he picks up on stuff like this. Leapfrogs over, to the most part, Baillie Scott, mentions Baillie Scott, completely leaps over Edgar Wood and George Walton, and then starts talking about buildings like this. And I think you can see direct influence. And there's some pretty familiar furniture forms at Darmstadt as well. Over here we've got one of Voysey's classic heart motif chairs. Voysey, it's a Voysey heart motif, is it? If you actually go back and really start rooting through the moderns, you start realising it's really difficult to tell who starts using the heart first. And they're all using it by about 1896, 97. It's crazy. And these chairs by Voysey, they didn't appear till 1899. And then an Olbrich chair from Darmstadt. I think it was a tea room chair. I think they had, during the exhibition, I think they had tea rooms set up there. And then you've got, again, Olbrich being brilliant, and you can kind of see that he's taking inspiration, but he doesn't want to be found out for copying. Not at all. And then you've got Behrens' bedroom suite, and you say, well, that's not that close, and that is true. But this kind of the kind of three-part bed design, divided up in three backboard. Both Baillie Scott and Edgar Wood were doing that, and that's a really nice example by Edgar. This is from the 1896 Arts and Crafts exhibition, which is where the moderns really start to see them coming through. They were all there at that point, including Mackintosh. Okay, and then this, I find this really suspicious. 1901, this is dated 1901. If you were going to take this interior and you were going to kind of Jugendstil it, you would come up with that. I mean, look where the stairs are. They're over here. You've got the hall. You've got the canted bay either side of the fireplace. And this was published in Germany a couple of years later in Modern and Bauer format. Spurtby Lodge Lytham, by the way, which is now fully dead. It's UVCP window. No, yeah, it was never listed. Tragically, we don't really know if it ever looked like this. Know the furniture with some things similar to what Mackintosh was doing at the time. Espionage. The dates are sometimes very tight. Well, Henry Wilson said the following: foreigners who make a study of these things say, we are enormously interested in your decorative art because you undoubtedly lead the world. Germany recognised that before the war. She was actually in the habit of sending commissioners over here to crib our ideas and buy up our artists and craftsmen. And I sometimes wonder about this kind of thing. Was he literally shipping this out the door off to Germany as soon as he painted it? So Darmstadt as a monument to first wave modernism you know, my proposal, this is what Darmstadt's all about. I'm not sure how the Germans, by the way, will feel about me analysing their UNESCO World Heritage Site, encouraging the idea that a bunch of Brits have inspired it. But I am a world citizen, I am a European, I intend to be a Finnish citizen, I'm a European citizen, and I'd love us to join in the UNESCO World Heritage Club with our arts and crafts heritage, none of which is UNESCO World Heritage listed. How can the Red House, for example, not be UNESCO World Heritage listed? So hopefully this might get it on the table with some people that matter and have agency. Don't know. It's a punt in the dark, isn't it? But yeah, I've got the root of secessionism across Europe. We had secessionists. The moderns were secessionists. They started to just break out of the Battle of the Styles in the 1890s. Brilliant design, I think it's Ladbroke Road Library, which I'm not showing here, but it is important, by Henry Wilson, 1890, and the work of Arthur Agate McMurdo, which people like Jonathan Meades have poo-pooed, you know, the classic back of the chair, the beginnings of Art Nouveau. I don't think it should be poo-pooed. I think we were being watched very closely by the continent as early back as the 1880s. And so, yeah, it comes down here, into Brussels, into Munich, into Vienna, and then they pile it all back on at Darmstadt. And that's what Darmstadt is all about. It's about mixing this first wave, this first generation of modernists from Britain and Brussels. So the influence of Belgian Art Nouveau at Darmstadt. Here you see Hankar's window forms being aimed by Olbrich. And then outside, again, another dead giveaway is Henri van der Velde's chairs from his own house. Designed about 1897, being aped by Peter Behrens in the House Behrens. So it's not just about the British arts and crafts moderns. This is about creating a monument to the first 10 years of breakout modernism. And so to backtrack a little bit further and find you a little bit more convincing evidence, because I think it's pretty convincing when people do things like this. This is, I've mentioned the London 1896 exhibition, and you can see it during 1895, 96, 90 to 98 passing across to Vienna via the secessionists. Olbrich will touch upon it again in a minute. Olbrich spent some of his Rome scholarship travelling to Britain in 1895. I think he went east and then he came back to Vienna and then he went west to Britain. 1895. I think I know the kinds of people he was sitting down with and trying to find out what's going on. And he'll have found a lot of this out possibly from Wagner, who was an honorary member of both the RIBA and I think the Royal Academy. So up here you've got Alfred Wickham Jarvis's incredible chair. It inspired something else, I believe, but that's something for another lecture. And a chair that's almost certainly attributable to Olbrich, because it stood in the Secession Building when the Secession Building made its debut for the second Secession exhibition in 1898. Down here, you remember, of course, Alfred Wickham Jarvis is a minor figure of the arts and crafts movement, just as Edgar Wood is a minor figure of the arts and crafts movement, just as Walter Cave is a minor figure of the arts and crafts movement. And here he is almost certainly inspiring the great Otto Wagner in 1898. So it's passing across, they're watching us. And this, a little bit like the Glasgow School of Art, I think it's quite widely already acknowledged that Olbrich was interested in this brilliant breakaway design for the Whitechapel Art Gallery by Charles Harrison Townsend. Oh, I meant to do a really theatrical thing here. And at the same time, Charlie's fully furnished interior design arrives in Vienna to help drive forward the revolution. And that's when you're all expecting Charles Rennie Mackintosh. It's not, it's Charles Francis Annesley Voysey, uncredited, who first appears displaying a fully furnished new art interior in Vienna in 1898. Thanks to Tony Pett from the Voysey Society, who I've been delicately trying to get in contact with Tony. I really want to talk to him because I want to get together and take on the world. And yeah, what he says about this interior, he says, apart from the interiors in his own home, which at this time still contained an eclectic mix of shop-bought and self-designed pieces, this was his first complete interior design scheme, 1898. I think me and David got into how the Voysey was doing this right at the beginning of the 1890s. He's not, it's a hard road. And I think the Germans know that we're so independent-minded over here, and our clients are so independent-minded, it's really difficult to create a Gesamtkunstwerk interior. Excuse me, I'm going to come in here and design your entire house for you. It doesn't sit well with us English, does it? The Germans are more into it, and we'll touch upon why that is in a bit. Okay, so some evidence for Viennese reverence of the preeminent British moderns. You've got that interior just mentioned by Voysey of Vienna, and then a centrepiece tapestry for the Austrian Pavilion at Schwerin in 1902. And when you put it into its broader context of the moderns as a group inspiring, it makes more sense, because these things get picked up upon by people that are looking at the individual architects. I want to get away from that and focus on the group, because then you really start to build up a picture. They're not just in love with Mackintosh, they love all of these British moderns, they really do. So you've got Mackintosh, as we know, the secession, 1900, and then interestingly in 1909 there's the International Kunstschau, the kind of international, it's the kind of post-secession, but still organised by the secessionist. It's there. It's weird. Basically, the Gustav Klimt's The Kiss appeared for the first time in the 1908 show, and then it becomes an international show the next year, and they celebrate the moderns, just for good measure, because my argument is that British architecture is still having an effect up to 1910 in Europe, in Central Europe, Germany, whereas Pevsner claims it's only after 1902 there's no more progress. Don't believe it. Baillie Scott, Interiors at Darmstadt, the Kunstschau again, and then Edgar Wood and George Walton both appearing at the Budapest Applied Arts Exhibition, and of course Wood's solar watercolours displayed at the International Congress of Architects in Vienna in 1908. C.L. Ashbee, our sixth man, numerous years of exhibits at the secession because they are really interested in him, the Guild of Handicraft, the dynamics of it, and it has a big influence upon the founding and the workings of the Vienna Werkstätte. And this is where there's some really good evidence, again, for the influences having in the German publications. And these things that you see at Vienna a year or so later, you see them here in the print debut in Germany of the moderns. Who are the people ploughing a path towards Darmstadt? I was going to put some portraiture up here and didn't get to it, unfortunately. But Otto Wagner, Van der Velde, who incidentally he has a real interest in Voysey's wallpapers and almost certainly becomes deeply influenced by Voysey's conception of total design, because that's what this really is all about, total design. Olbrich and the Seemann Club, who is almost certainly basing this little... The Seemann Club is what precedes the Vienna secession. It's a little band of architects and designers over a pint sharing ideas, and I think that I think he might well have picked up the idea in 1895 in Britain with the Quarto Club, the Quarto Imperial Club, which was Tony Pett tells us that was a little band of designers around Voysey who were doing a similar thing, and that's almost certainly, I think, where Olbrich's taken up the idea. Julius Meyer-Greff as a critic and founder of Decorative Kunst, and also Hermann Mutasius, who is also kind of co-founder of this magazine. He's a really important critic when it comes to modern art, and then forming the canon in terms of modern art. And this is the man that tells Mutasius, get up to Glasgow to go and check out Mackintosh. And he's almost certainly aware of Wood and Baillie Scott and the rest of them. Because with Mutasius, it's important with Mutasius, I think a lot of British scholars and book writers have gone to Mutasius thinking that they are reading some kind of connoisseurial opinion piece. It's not. I think Mutasius, what he writes is a reflection on avant-garde figures coming over to Britain, looking for the front line, the future of architecture, and Hermann Mutasius is reporting back on that. It's not just a connoisseurial, this is what I think piece. And here we go, going back a little bit earlier in the 1890s, Van der Velde's villa on the outskirts of Brussels, always pinned as being somehow influenced by the Red House. It's nothing like the Red House, but it's very like this work by Voysey, who we know he's looking at the wallpapers of. There's records of him sending his fiancée to Essex and Co. in London on a kind of spy mission for him to get samples. And then Voysey's early furniture, kind of breakaway new art furnitures, and you can see how they've impacted the mentality of Van der Velde when it also comes to furnishing. Which brings up the question of Art Nouveau and whether the moderns have inspired the beginnings of Art Nouveau in Belgium. That is something that really needs to be combed over. People have touched on it in the past. I still think it needs really looking into. So break time. Sorry, I know it's been intense. Just a last thought on Darmstadt. Because if you've got doubts about whether Baillie Scott and Voysey and Charles Rennie Mackintosh could possibly be influencing the creation of Darmstadt, all tied in with the German government as it was and everything. You have a diplomat over here in 1900 giving you the names right there. Voysey, Edgar Wood, Mackintosh, Baillie Scott, they're all there. And I think that Mathesius, this is all in German, it's never been translated into English. I had to get Google Translate out. And I have faith in Google Translate because I live in Finland, so it's getting better, So that's something to take into the break with you. It's not madness, I'm not mad. It's there. UNESCO World Heritage Site. Big question, are they UNESCO worthy buildings in Britain? Okay, the moderns. So now I'm actually going to explain to you about who the moderns are, why they are the moderns. A lost British treasure trove with big heritage potential. How do we know about them? Are there more sources than Das Englische Haus? How do we identify them? Who were they? What traits did they share? And how do we rank them? What type of influence did they have on whom and how? Well, we've certainly seen some of that already. A key question, are Britain's historians and institutions prepared to see them as the continent did and help propel them into the star-studded realm of World Heritage UNESCO? We talked about that a little bit in the break, and we talked about the fact that groupings are quite difficult, although there is Middleton, there is Hale, there is the banks of Windermere, where of course you have Blackwell by Baillie Scott, and you have the two best Voysey houses, Broadleys and Moorcroft. So who knows? I'm also thinking about institutions because I think that these guys should be in the V&A, they should be in all the houses like Hill House, Blackwell, but then they should also be in the MAC in Vienna, and they should be in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. They are that calibre. So I'm sending it out there, and hopefully, really important curators are going to start emailing me. I'd love that. I didn't say at the beginning, by the way, I did the Museums and Art Galleries course at Manchester. I am a would-be curator, but my circumstances in Finland probably mean I'm going to change career because I'm going to need to speak full Finnish, which is very challenging if I'm going to pursue museum work, and it might be better to pursue other things. But I certainly know about curation, and I have a huge passion for museums and for heritage. Come on. Okay, the moderns, some key sources found so far. There's that brilliant source that we just had during the break from Herman Thesis 1900, and then a brilliant, deeply scathing article by Harry S. Curry, The Art of the Modern School in The Artist, 1902. The Artist, incidentally, was dying a terrible death because it couldn't cope with the arrival of the magazine The Studio. It used to be an all-text journal on the arts. The Studio came along, it desperately tried to compete, filled its pages with an equal amount of illustrations by new art designers, and then just as it was dying, it started publishing really nasty articles about the new art. So I'm not going to take Harry S. Curry, who disappeared into nothingness, all that seriously when he's pelting the likes of CFA Voysey, Baillie Scott, Edgar Wood, and Charles Rennie Mackintosh with the mud that he throws at them. But this is where the label New Art. New Art is an interesting label, obviously English Art Nouveau, and effectively it is. There's a big question, does it predate Art Nouveau? I think it does. We need to know more about it, really. But yeah, probably the best piece of writing on them comes from Das Englische Haus in this very German-sounding section. Second consequence of the connection with arts and crafts, the new vocabulary of forms. Got battery problems here, I reckon. Okay, now there's an awful lot of writing on here, and I will skip over it a fair bit. But this section is brilliant in Das Englische Haus, because he reveals that there is a divide in the arts and crafts movement. It's very poorly understood, seemingly very rarely acknowledged. But what you have is a set of architects broadly they've been broadly kind of labelled the Shaw School. You hear Pevsner maybe use that term here and there. I've broadened it up a little bit and decided to call them the Puritans, based upon how he describes the purist aims of architecture. And they are primarily Shaw students who are founders of the Art Workers Guild. I've got what I would describe as kind of the main Shaw School: Ernest Newton, May, Horsley, Macartney. They do, to be fair to them, they pioneer the sort of reticent, stripped back neo-vernacular villa. And this then goes on and inspires Voysey, Baillie Scott, etc. Then you've got Letheby and Pryor, who I've kind of described as sort of Morris Webb school, kind of free building. They're really interested in the deep vernacular. And I've put the likes of Randall Wells, Detmar Blow, Jimson in there. These are the buildings like All Saints at Rockhampton by Letheby. It's almost as if they've been handcrafted. They come out of the earth. They have sort of, and like I say, it's sort of neo-primitive vernacular about them. They are brilliant. Later on down here, I suggest that they are a national treasure, because I don't want to be seen to be starting a civil war with people down in the Cotswolds and people down in Leicestershire who deal with Jimson Stonewall, because they are brilliant. But it's a different type of arts and crafts, and it's important to understand that Hermann Mathesius was quite critical of them. He suggested that they were reactionary, and that the term escapist has been used about them. They're hiding from the modern world. And I'm increasingly interested in the moderns because of their connections to urban areas, because I think that they are using the arts and crafts to adapt architecture and design to the modern world. More and more, I think, because of pioneers and because of the Pevsner legacy, we kind of think of the arts and crafts as being really retrogressive. It's really retrospective. It's going backwards. It's running away from the modern world, and it's completely opposed to it. I don't think the moderns were, and that's something that I will, certainly some of them, some less so, but that's something I'll probably explore in another lecture a little bit more. But to actually focus on the moderns, Mathesius describes them as a smallish group. They form a striking contrast and a friendly division to the Puritans, as I've labelled them, within the Art Workers Guild, due to them working in often shared new forms. Surely that's the realms of Art Nouveau, promoting new forms. No, it seems that we were doing it first, Mathesius seems to be suggesting. Right here, the new vocabulary forms astonished the continent during the first half of the 1890s. Key question then, did it trigger Belgian Art Nouveau? The whole of the continent has been so powerfully influenced by England due to this group's new understanding of the house and its contents as a single entity, i.e. they have been the first to achieve a complete synthesis between the province of William Morris, i.e. the interior, and that of the architect, i.e. the exterior. Now, Mathesius identifies Voysey as the progressive pioneer total designer. Peter Davey, in his books on arts and crafts architecture, he labelled Voysey the pathfinder. It's a great label for him. He's the first to do it. And one thing about Voysey's economy of form, the simplicity of his design, it more easily allows him to design everything, which is quite an interesting thing to sort of carry along with us. That's absolutely a pathway towards the things of modernism. It is arts and crafts with a deeper emphasis on art and modernising economical total design, ultimately overseen by an orchestrating. I've thrown in the word polymathic there because I was watching a documentary on Mackintosh, and one of the talking heads suggested he was a polymath. And I thought, well, I'm not sure he'd use polymath for, because he's a designer, isn't he? But in terms of design, within the realm of design, yes, they are polymathic designers. They have a world of skill to design everything. Incidentally, Wood was a craftsman as well, which that's completely unique amongst this set of architects. Whereas with the Puritans, it is arts and crafts with a deeper emphasis on craft, and the free buildings are supplying national treasures. although they were excessively utopian, impractical, escapist, and were stress-inducing to execute in the face of rampant modernity. That's me, probably not. But I think that's it ultimately. All Saints of Brockhampton, it nearly drove Letherby to a breakdown, and he gave up architectural practice. You know, they're beautiful buildings, but they're not practical, and they weren't really the way forward. A kind of glorious failure, and they are a national treasure. There's a handful of them. The connections. How do the moderns know one another? Well, there's some shared influences. It's very interesting. Circa 1890, a lot of their designs show powerful influence from the shingle style coming over from New England and the United States. That's where a lot of this modernising of the vernacular, a lot of their inspiration comes from there. You've got Arthur Hedgate McMurdo and the Century Guild at Panel Hall, just down the road here in Wilmslow. Massively influential building. And it gets published in the Art Journal in 1891. And you can see so many things that this set of architects are going to pick up on. There are perforated hearts in there. So we want to know where the perforated heart comes from way back in the 1880s. Ernest Newton, incidentally, was using them for window shutters as well, earlier than that. Then the Art Workers Guild, and I've already mentioned the Corto Imperial Club. And you can see the names from the moderns who are involved here. The Home Arts and Industries Association, I've talked about women and their involvement in this side of the movement. Well, this association, it kind of promoted what you could describe as dilettantism. It is encouraging more and more people to join in with the arts and crafts movement. I'm increasingly interested in recognising the arts and crafts and these journals as a form of pop culture, as developing pop culture. There's an interesting quote we're going to come to on that. And then I've highlighted the Northern Art Workers Guild in Manchester. Richard, as well as doing excellent work on Edgar Wood, he's been doing great work on the Northern Art Workers Guild. Really, really interesting. You get some brilliant connections here. Wood is a joint founder, so he's a mainstay. Voysey comes and delivers a talk in Manchester a year before it's established. I suspect Wood may very well have been involved in Voysey coming down to Manchester. Sorry, it's dropping again, isn't it? Henry Wilson is a modern, but I've marked the preeminence. Walton comes up and delivers a talk, so we can now assume that Walton and Wood know one another, and Mackintosh. It's a kind of an indicator that no one's really figured the moderns out, that people are still kind of umming and ahhing about whether it was Edgar Wood that called the Mackintosh up to Manchester. Was it actually the Northern Art Workers Guild? It certainly was. And then the Glasgow School of Art, as well as MacDonald Sisters, you've got the likes of Jessie King and Macbeth. And indeed, the Northern Art Workers Guild, as Richard would tell you, it was fantastically progressive and allowed women in. The Art Workers Guild in London did not. So there's some key exhibitions. 1893, it's starting to creep in, but more importantly, 1896. Quite a number of them are there. Walton wasn't, but the rest of them were. And you can really see the new forms taking off, and then you can see Vienna really picking up. Some interesting commissions. Wood and W.J. Neeby, Middleton, 1892. I'll let you see that in a minute. Baillie Scott and Ashbee at Darmstadt in 1897, which is just before Olbrich comes in and starts doing the artist's residence. He does an interior commission for Ernst Ludwig. Again, just emphasising how big these British names are over there. And then I've put Wilson. That should be Mackintosh and Walton. Glasgow 1897, doing the Cranston tea rooms together. One last point actually on that. One thing that people would nitpick over this, especially the Voysey Society, they would say that Voysey didn't like Mackintosh, he slagged off the spook school. Well, they've both got a mutual friend in George Walton. When Walton died, Voysey said, I've known him for 40 years, he's a great designer, could design anything. Walton had worked with Mackintosh up in Glasgow. They're only ever one person removed. They didn't have to be best friends. It's an artistic clique. Not everyone has to get along with one another. Okay, and then I'm going to do some Puritans versus moderns to just emphasise the different kind of buildings and the different kind of building styles you're looking at, with buildings that are in quite similar situations. Over here you've got Newton's Learsos coming towards the end of this brilliant run of villas he does in the late 1880s and early 1890s. And you can see how Voysey, I think he's gathering up lots of ideas for the forms that he's going to use, and then he Voyseyizes them. strips it all back and gives you this kind of, this is the modern's new art neo-vernacular. You've got Jimson's Liasos, that's not a mistake by the way, they're both called Liasos, confusingly. All thatched roofs, this is the kind of straight out of the earth architecture that I talked about of the Cotswold School. And then Powell, which makes a really nice contrast with Holly Cottage down there in my native Bramhall. Okay, and this over here, beautiful neo-vernacular, thoroughly proto-modern, if you like, if that's what you want to label it, by Baillie Scott. And then a bit of variation, not just houses. Over here, you've got a fascinating contrast between Letherby's Eagle Insurance Building, lots of craft on the outside, kind of brilliantly modernising, but still sort of seems to have a kind of old world feel about it, and then Mackintosh again stripped back, minimal proto-modernism, or pioneer modernism. Over here, you've got a church that Wood might very well have been aware of when he was designing Longstreet, but then it kind of, this is the new art take on it. Far more elegant, in my view, far more appealing, and clearly far more appealing to the Germans as well. And over here, what I love about Prior and his models is it's almost as if they are handcrafting architecture. And I think Voysey's barn, which preceded this is the previous model that he did, where it was shown at the Royal Academy, in the end almost certainly won a commission off the back of it and created the barn, which is this brilliant butterfly house in 1895. They've been kind of handcrafting an architectural project, handcrafting a house. Whereas these guys, they're all about the craft, they're all about the art and the design, the arts and crafts moderns. And there's Baillie Scott with a house that was seemingly never realised, not in this country at least. There's a doppelganger in the Netherlands. That's one for another time. Yeah, great contrast. And then the interiors. The Puritans, it was all about sort of white walls. And I think people get themselves a bit nuts when the influence or the sort of foreshadowing of modernism is seen in the arts and crafts movement. They start talking about the white walls in Stonywell somehow being some kind of foreshadowing of modernism. It's not. It's this stuff down here. And you know, it's white walls. It's beautifully crafted, but it's very old world. It's deeply, deeply vernacular. But no doubt some of the Cotswold School furniture did show innovations of a sort. It's kind of weird. It's almost kind of steampunk-esque, actually. Is it going backward? Is it going forward? And it's wonderful, but this is something completely different. These guys are colourists as well. The likes of Wood, this is the interior to Holly Cottage, and this is the proposed interior to Onchen Village Hall in the Isle of Man by Baillie Scott. They were brilliant watercolourists, amongst the best in the world, and that's not my words. That's how it's reported in the architectural press, especially in Germany and America. And here you've got brilliant contrast between the kind of Philip Clizet evolved Jimson ladder mats, very traditional, very tied to the deep vernacular, and he played off against Mackintosh's furniture, which was by far the most get-ahead, then perhaps Voysey's. Wood's is a little less get-ahead, but that's not the only criteria when it comes to this furniture. Identifying the shared and new art motifs of the moderns, as illustrated and labelled by Harry S. Curry's Hostile 1902 article. This first one is the best. This is the one that they all do. This is the well-deserving pillar. Now you can pick those out now because you're going to see them. You walk into the main hall through here, you've got a couple of well-deserving pillars. They're all over the place in new art properties. It wasn't. They don't come from Voysey. They go further back to McMurdo. Walter Cave uses them earlier than any of this. The rest of this group, and then they go right back to Morris & Co. furniture designed by George Jack. But it's the moderns that really pick up on them. Then you've got the toasting forks. You have the low arch. Observe the low arch and the kind of tapered feet. Observe. Attributed to E.A. Taylor, confirmed modern as per Matthesius. And then you've got your perforated hearts, and it's a new art interior within a quaint neo-vernacular shell. The term quaint gets used over and over again. I think it's a derogatory term. so I don't like to use it. They face quite a bit of hostility at this point, and I think it possibly causes Voysey to sort of speak out things that probably harm his own career quite a bit, but that's another story. A case study, this is something I've spotted in their architecture. It's something that I've called the lookout turret. It's a variable motif and it appears all over the place. Great one is the Narden. Wood does this a few times. It's a kind of cut-off canted bay, just two-sided canted bay that kind of ends into a wall. And Wood does it first, and then Mackintosh starts using it. This is the entrance that you go into at the sublime, miraculous Hill House. But it's Wood that actually does it first, and he does it down the road here at Rose in 1896. And all the rest of them are doing it. I love this one, tucked in here at Fives Court by Smith and Brewer. Brilliant one there by Leonard Stokes. And I talked about that Wood and W.J. Neatby commission. Neatby was the head of Royal Dalton's architectural department, and they faced the Manchester and Salford Bank by Edgar Wood down at the roundabout here in 1892. So this is probably penned by Edgar Wood, but then W.J. Neatby then lifts it and he applies it to the Royal Arcade down in Norwich, which provides us a beautiful portal. There's a few portals in places like Edgar Wood's Middleton and and Lindley as well. There are portals. Go into the back door, you end up out in Norwich. There's other ones, incidentally, to Brussels and to Chicago. I can talk about those in other lectures. But there's a nice one for you, Sibby, for the tours. Where are you, Sibby? There you are. Your tours, if you're in WJ Neatby. And then the classic Voysey up through the eaves bay window. Actually, Wood's been doing that first, as we know here. This one's particularly good from 1896 because the window line pops up over the roof line as well. And Voysey has not yet done that. So we can run some legitimate claim to maybe having inspired one of the most enduring arts and crafts motifs in the hands of CFA Voysey. There's some really interesting links between Wood and Mackintosh. Way too much. You probably use a lecture on that alone. This one is particularly interesting. This is the doorway above Queen's Cross church door, and here is the Lindley Clock Tower. Here's the original drawing, where this motif doesn't really appear in this form. This is never published, so how would Wood know about that if they weren't in contact? And I've got a working theory, and me and David did discuss this, that Mackintosh had possibly got up to Glasgow maybe to see the opening of the Glasgow School of Art. Seemann and Gillespie's famous hat rack building, which is a slightly alternative take on the Glasgow style, that was going up at the same time, and you can see similarities. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that this design predates that design, or that this predates that. It honestly doesn't. For example, this was getting exhibited in January of 1900 in the United States, which means it must, because it's quite early in January, must have been designed at least in 1899. The plans for it didn't go in until 1901. So dating buildings in terms of who's actually creating motifs first, we can't actually really say for certain. In the background of a Royal Academy drawing of the tower, Edgar Wood produces this over here. And I think there could be a bit of hat tipping, could be saying thank you for a couple of motifs. You've got this Glasgow School of Art East Wing motif repeated here, and then you've got this fascinating chimney that comes from the Seemann and Gillespie house. I think it's Knockbuckle, it's one of them. It's the one that sits right next to Mackintosh's Windy Hill in Kilmacon. Okay, and now ranking the eminent and preeminent moderns. This is where, especially when you're correlating it with what's going on at Darmstadt, where I think Wood really does stand up. I'm going to back this up as well as being really deeply important, as being in the top band in the preeminence. He mentions him in 1900, and then when he does a full analysis, including 28 active moderns that the analyses, these are the word counts. Now, Wood is not just a houseman. Voysey is, and Mackintosh is Mackintosh, so they're going to make a fuss of Mackintosh. Baillie Scott as well is pretty much purely a houseman. So Wood hasn't done that many houses, and that's English house. So it was always likely that they were going to talk about the others a little bit more. But what's very interesting is that he ranks joint first in the images alongside Voysey's Broadleys. So I think there's a lot of respect. Matthesius' writing is he clearly likes, I've gone into that thing now, Matthesius likes Wood's work. The Germans clearly like Wood's work. Ashbee the Sixth Man, by the way. Matthesius doesn't really rate his architecture so highly. We'll get into that a little bit later, so that's why he's right the way down there, and there's some doubts about it. I'm really sorry about some of the fonts, by the way. I desperately went through them all trying to get the Arial back, because it defaults and it's a slightly older laptop here. So the reason one for what grants them their special status is the individuality, scope and totality of their design work. They had all published and exhibited an exceptional spectrum of design work. They were relatively influential at home, but on the continent their status as modernising total designers aligned them to some powerful ideologies, especially in Europe. The Wagnerian ideal of the Gesamtkunstwerk, the total work of art, the Nietzschean ideal of the Übermensch, the superhuman. I think this is really important. This is why, because they design everything. And as you'll see in a minute, no one else comes near them. And then there's general reformist ideals relating to modernity and domesticity. They're very big in Vienna, for example, at the time. And then national romantic ideologies in places such as the place I live, Finland, and in those countries at the time that were occupied by the larger empires. Then the second reason for their special status is their successful achievement of a masterpiece Gesamtkunstwerk house by 1901. In Wood's case, of course, he does it with Banny Royd, with Voysey's Broadleys, Mackintosh, Windy Hill, Blackwell, and Delays by George Walton. Those are the books that are in Das Englische Haus. And this really cements their status on the continent as pioneering masters of the idiom. And it's also on this point that Ashbee's status as a preeminent is a little bit wobbly. He never really executes a standalone detached villa of quite the same kind of scale and type as the others. Right, now, it'll speed up a little bit to prove a point. The capabilities of the preeminence. As it's run previously, you've got Voysey top left, Mackintosh top right, Baillie Scott middle left, Edgar Wood middle right, Walton bottom left, and then Ashbee bottom right. And so we have elevations for buildings, elevations for furniture, watercolour exteriors, watercolour interiors, and this from the brick builder in 1914. The watercolour work of Voysey, Baillie Scott and Edgar Wood has much resemblance. They, with some of their imitators, constitute a school or class of rendering which is not paralleled in the USA. No black and white reproductions of their work do it justice, and even colour reproductions fail to fully express their quality. They pretty much are the best in the world. Some of the Germans are pretty good as well, and there are not many of them doing it. There is a very small set of, effectively it is these guys. There's a couple of others, but really not many. In a British context, that is. So you've got fireplaces, ironwork, stained glass. Lighting, ceiling and wall treatments. External doors, internal doors and pattern work. This is the one attribution, by the way, that I put on here. This is in Upmeads by Edgar Wood. It'd be lovely to find out, especially via perhaps Manchester archives, by Manchester companies, did he do more pattern work? Because that's something we're a little short on sort of curtains, carpets, wallpapers. There's a bit of a question mark there, but this we think is probably by him, and it's from Upmeads. We've got, I've changed all these, goodness me. Definitely. So we've got chairs, sideboards, and these are kind of washstands or dressing tables because the designs are relatively similar in both cases. And then wardrobes, display cabinets, and pianos, and an organ down here from George Walton. Tables, beds, and settles. Ashbee's starting to drop off a little bit, but I'm convinced that he and the guild, the school and guild of handicraft, will have produced them. I probably should have got in contact with Court Barn Museum if I'd had a little bit more time to. Have you got any Ashbee beds for me? Incidentally, the vast majority of this stuff, including Wood's, is published. That's how we know it's his work. And then we've got some cabinets, and some more cabinets. I could have done this with chairs as well. And you can see on them as well, you can see things like these are the toasting forks that Curry describes. They'll be perforated hearts, and then, you've got another one pointing upwards there. The low arches here on the Edgar Wood cabinet. And then we go down in size a little bit to mantel clocks and sort of tableware, to metalwork and tableware. This is a drawing by Edgar Wood, but he exhibited some of this bottleware. He exhibited it at the Northern Art Workers Guild exhibition, I think, in 1903. So there is evidence that he was making things like this. And this tankard over here, that was crafted by Wood, because he was craft capable in both metal and wood. And then it really drops off down the middle here for Baillie Scott and Edgar Wood, when you've got some cutlery by Voysey, Mackintosh, Walton and Ashbee, and then jewellery, for which Ashbee really, and Matthesius pointed this out, Ashbee was really known for his metalwork and his jewellery. And then we've got some graphical work that they've done for various things. These are Baillie Scott actually he designed a whole batch of furniture for J.B. White and Co, but then also illustrated the catalogue. And this is George Ragg, Edgar Wood designing a catalogue for his fellow Northern Art Workers Guildsman, George Ragg. And then onto the architecture and the gardens. We've got gardens in terms of their actual design, gardens in terms of their planning, and then the houses. We've got butterfly villas, large terraces, large detached houses, those kind of Gesamtkunstwerk type houses. This one by Ashbee that didn't have a Gesamtkunstwerk interior, and I think it was a bit of a conversion job as well. And then the kind of medium detached houses. Ashbee again, and Walton are a little bit ropey. Walton wasn't originally an architect, by the way, he was a self-taught architect. And then you have semi-detached houses, of which Wood produced a good number. Both of these here in Middleton. Studio houses, town houses, kind of 3-storey or over houses that would work well in a town centre like here in Middleton. Don't do it.
Pointed at the sensor.
Where is the sensor? What's there? Sorry. Is it going to? Yeah. It's a funny instinct, isn't it, to point it in completely the wrong place. Thanks, Mark. One cathedral, Charles Rennie Mackintosh. And then churches, community halls, dream schemes, I've called them. These are rather fantastical projects that were never executed. Exhibition pavilions, extensions, some graveyard designs, including gravestones, and there's a little graveyard office by Baillie Scott. Then we've got hotels and hostels, lodges, and kind of experimental things that were not quite what they usually do, which are all quite interesting. We've got office buildings. Wood is really well represented right across the board here, by the way, and we're not even going to go into church fittings, which Wood did a great amount of, and Voysey did, as far as I know, very little to nothing. Baillie Scott did very little to nothing. Mackintosh did some. There's a good argument for maybe for Edgar Wood being the greatest all-rounder, of the arts and crafts movement in some respects, which is madness, it sounds, but it's quite true. Where do we get to? Overseas projects, schools, shops, a second round of shops, and some stables. Town planning, Edgar Wood is unique in that he does do town planning work amongst the set of architects. And then kind of miscellaneous schemes that don't quite, quite unique projects to these architects. So the work of the eminent moderns, as opposed to the preeminent, so the guys that are really good but not great, is good but it's limited. They simply cannot keep up with this sort of top five plus the sixth man. And this is why Edgar Wood is so important, why he is not a lesser member of the arts and crafts movement. And this is Walter Case. This is pretty much all you get. This is the lot. There's a couple more interiors. They're very stripped back, very pared down, very, very Voysey-esque, because there's also the fact that his idiom is arguably far too close to Voysey. That's another reason that Wood is great. The other moderns, aside from Voysey, it's about how they can express their own individual idiom away from Voysey, and Wood very successfully does that. If people were looking at him with a connoisseurial eye, they would have recognised that, but I think they just kind of listened a bit too much to the likes of Pevsner. And then Charles Harrison Townsend, despite his influential designs for institutional buildings such as the Bishopsgate Institute, Whitechapel Art Gallery, Horniman Museum, he just doesn't seem to be able to deliver a Gesamtkunstwerk work. We never see any colour interiors, very limited furnishings. And this is the guy that he seemed to have the big map. He was the one that was promoting these ideas. Matthias sort of points that out. He's very keen on promoting the ideas. Doesn't seem able to execute because, to be fair, it's probably really difficult to do that. I think Mackintosh, and Voysey kind of testament to that. So some final words. Matthias is moderns versus Pevsner's pioneers. Why should we be suspicious? Well, right here, Matthias, 1904, that's Englisher House. This is the ranking again in terms of word counts. And you see how Pevsner, he just pulls Edgar Wood and George Walton right out. Leonard Stokes and Walter Cave, not that they're interesting to Matthias, because I think he reckoned Leonard Stokes was a great architect and did a lot of variety of work, and I think people like Mackintosh and Wood, they really respected him, but he did not Gesamtkunstwerk. He did not furnish. There's no furniture, there's no interiors really that we know of, where we can see that he is a committed craftsman, committed craft designer of furnishings. And it gets weaker and weaker. Henry Wilson, brilliant man, absolute visionary, but primarily a churchman, and only ever executed as a whole complete work of art a single small church at Brythdir in Wales. Whereas you've got, they produce so many buildings, these guys up the top here, including Mackintosh really, in real terms. And then the kind of needs reforming really because of what happens over here. These are the guys that should be up in this British list of dates for arts and crafts figures that then leads down into Olbrich, Peter Behrens, Josef Hoffmann. Precisely because, and the problem I've got with it is that it has a bunch of Cotswold School designers in there. I don't have a problem with the Cotswold School, but if it's about the design lineage of modern design, then really you should have the moderns in there, the extra moderns. You've got Baillie Scott, you've got Voysey, probably got Mackintosh in there as well. But there's no Edgar Wood and there's no George Walton, because they got cut out by Pevsner. Hugely influential book, Pevsner's Pioneers of the Modern Movement, and really problematic because of its influence. It really does need critiquing from the perspective of these architects, from the perspective of Wood and Walton, and I shall continue to do that. So, and the end note, a revisionist modernist design lineage taken directly from FRS York's The Modern House of 1934 and the era of Bauhaus emigres in Britain. York would go into partnership with Marcel Goya, around about this time, and I think it's very interesting that the Bauhaus were in Britain at this point. I think they were probably being quite truthful to other architects, but I think the Germans may have had a bit of an agenda to not over-egg and not really tell us too much about how close our architects came and about the ingredients they left on the table for the furtherment of the modernist agenda. So firstly, to start off, after William Morris, this is the lineage. Philip Webb, CFA Voysey, no postage stamp. M.H. Baillie Scott, Edgar Wood, George Walton, Charles Rennie Mackintosh, Frank Lloyd Wright, Louis Sullivan, Otto Wagner, Josef Hoffmann, Peter Behrens, H.B. Berlage, Josef Maria Olbrich, Adolf Loos, Hans Polti, Henri van der Velde, August Perret, Jan Rocard, Jan Kotera, Willem Dudok, and Gerrit Rietveld, both after Pierre Mondrian and the Stiel. That one's for you, Dad, because you love the Stiel. Walter Gropius, and finally Le Corbusier. He was a great man, they were great men. They deserve their place in life.
Any questions?
Any questions, or do you all just want to run home to bed? Oh, there we go.
Just a small footnote on Pevsner. I'm sure you know, when he comes to his West Riding Buildings of England volume and looks at Lindley Clock Tower, he refers to that remarkable Manchester architect.
Oh, yeah.
He does say Manchester, not Middleton.
Well, yeah.
That remarkable Manchester architect, Edgar Wood. Lindley Clock Tower is so willful that connections with Glasgow must be considered.
Yes. I think, to be fair to Pevsner, I don't want to be too cool on him, and the more I kind of explore the motives that he may have had, and what was motivating him, I'm quite sympathetic to all of it. But on that front, he was leaving clues, I think, for British academics. Back in 1942, when he writes that article, Nine Swallows No Summer, in the original article, he does sort of say, someone really needs to investigate Edgar Wood. But I think he's going to leave it for us to figure this out ultimately, because you can see the effect with people like Peter Cloud, minor figure, just completely falls off into the gutter, and it should never really have happened. I will explore those themes further, because it might not just have been Pevsner. It was quite a competitive point in history, you see, between nations, and so that's why the war had happened. You know, Pevsner was 20 when the Versailles Treaty was signed, and he was a baby when this was actually going on. So we don't have to trust his analysis too much he makes it a lot about the machine and the onset of the machine, and that's why our arts and crafts guys are not modernists, because they don't embrace the machine. I think because we were probably the leading industrial nation, we probably had just about enough of the machine. We probably didn't feel that we needed machines for living, so we were developing a different form of modernism. And you see that really kind of blossom in places like Amsterdam, with the Amsterdam School, because our guys, the modernists, they had a big effect there. There's things I'd like to talk about in future for other lectures that might not be as intense as this.
57 years ago, John Archer and Pevsner were speaking to each other, no doubt on other occasions as well, I don't actually know. How do you think one of those conversations might have gone?
That's a really good question, and I've often wondered. I'm wary when it comes to Pevsner, because my wife said, don't attack that historian that you keep going on about. And I was like, well, yeah, he's a national treasure, and it's probably going to land me in hot water. I think, Mark, I'm probably just going to put it off to the future when I delve more into that, around the flat reinforced concrete. I mean, the big problem is that the zeitgeist narrative he bases it along national lines. So he says that the zeitgeist lifts up in 1902 and it plonks itself in Germany, and that no further progress is made in Britain. And yet, Edgar Wood creates cubic flat roof architecture, not just on one building, because this is one of those moments where you think, hold on, Nicholas. He describes, I think he says that Upmead is the only building, before 1925, or the only building that sort of shows that was reminiscent of the architecture of the 1930s. It's not at all. There are a number of them. And he claims in the same article he's been in contact with J. Henry Sellers. Well, he could have told him about 36 Mellow Street, he could have told him about the house in Burnley, he could have told him about the extension over in Sheffield. And obviously you've got the two schools, and there's the Hampstead Garden suburb design as well that he does that was well published. It's a Parker and Unwin book. Town planners across Europe and the world would have seen. So
there's the unbuilt Birkby scheme in Huddersfield.
There is, of course, yes, absolutely. I mean, you stack them up. In 1908, when he was in Vienna, there were as many as 10 flat-roofed cubic buildings on the drawing board. We're not even touching on there. So I'm setting the agenda that he's actually already, if you like, a pioneer of the modern movement by 1900 already. So whatever he does next, it's going to be important. It's going to be influential. I mean, another thing, and again we'll really focus on a future lecture. Upmeads, the central portion of Upmeads, and this presumably was achieved using steel structure, as well as the flat reinforced concrete. It's got 3 levels in the middle, and they're on different levels to the 2 levels that run around the outside. You're getting into Adolf Lowe's kind of round plan territory there. And it's being published in the same journals in Vienna at the same time as Adolf Lowe's is getting published. And Wood's been there as an invitee exhibitor. So, am I suggesting that Edgar Wood might have influenced Adolf Lowe's round plan? Yes, I am. Because we have the right to do that. And I don't know, I mean, there's a degree of naivety on our part, perhaps, that people didn't go after it harder. And I mean, God knows how no one has ever found the Vienna stuff, it seems. I don't think John ever found it, the evidence that he was in Vienna in 1908. It shows in his design work as well. You see it in the schools and in his motifs, and that he's either sharing or co-creating motifs with the Viennese. It's extraordinary for a local architect. But yeah, I almost wouldn't want to speculate. I've got too much respect for John, but things cannot have been easy because I think Pevsner was kind of ruling the roost, and I think he was maybe leading people off on goose chases or possibly hiding it a little bit and letting people come to their own, as it were, false conclusions about the importance of Wood and the likes of Walton. I mean, he excludes Walton and then writes an article about him, and interestingly in that article he never talks about this incredible balcony that Walton does at the White House, that was probably seen by Walter Gropius and Peter Behrens, because Behrens and Gropius were in Britain in 1908 touring about, and they would have been going to these guys, the moderns. And they'd have gone and looked at the Crystal Palace and some big train stations, for the industrial architecture of Behrens, but they would have gone and talked to the moderns. So there's loads to be done still on that. Whether it's me or not, because I've got to go off and be a family man and let you guys go to bed. So I hope it's been interesting.
There's an article about 3 sisters of Butler Yeats, the Irishman, and these 3 women got way into arts and craft houses in Ireland.
Yes.
You know anything about this?
I don't know a great deal. I do know that the arts and crafts movement made this way. Yes, absolutely.
The two painters of the poet were very famous, and yet the 3 sisters nobody knows about. And they built arts and crafts.
Well, this is it. I mean, I think the arts and crafts movement is not done as a study subject, not by a long way. Because I think people think, oh yeah, we've had modernism, we've done all that. That was for that's for my mum and dad's generation. Dad knew a lot of them just through going to museums courses. Half the arts and crafts researchers that come to the 4-6. Dad was at university with them, and they all got killed off by punk, and everyone went off and started looking at Soviet architecture during the punk era. These guys are punk. What's the point? So yeah. Anyway, thank you very much. I hope it wasn't too laborious.